Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. About 6 years ago, I had a dream that I was bungee jumping. And in the dream, I died because of an accident during the jump. I know that sounds like the kind of random nightmare people have all the time, and normally I would probably agree. Dreams are weird. They can throw you into situations you have never been in, make you feel emotions that do not make sense, and then disappear the moment you wake up. Most of the time, you might remember a strange dream for a few minutes in the morning, maybe tell someone about it, and then forget it by lunch. But this one stayed with me because of what happened the very next morning. At the time, I was in the Army and living in the barracks. Barracks life has its own kind of routine. You wake up, walk out of your room, see the same people, have the same quick conversations, and then go through whatever the day requires. My roommate was also my best friend, and we spent a lot of time together. He was the kind of guy who always wanted to do something on the weekends. He hated sitting around. If there was free time, he wanted to fill it with some kind of activity, even if it was random or something we had never talked about before. I was not always like that. Sometimes I just wanted to stay in, relax, and be a homebody. Army life can wear you down, and when the weekend comes, not everyone wants to spend it looking for another way to get adrenaline pumping. But my roommate was different. He was always pushing for something. Sometimes it was harmless, sometimes it was spontaneous, and sometimes it was something that made me hesitate. He would usually try to talk me into it if I said no. He was not always mean about it, but he could definitely pressure me. If I seemed unsure, he would push harder, saying we should get out, do something fun, stop being boring, all of that. That is why what happened that morning felt even stranger. The night before, I had the dream. In the dream, I was bungee jumping. I do not remember every single detail of the place, but I remember the feeling of being there. There was that sense of standing high above the ground, looking down, knowing I was about to jump. I remember the fear and anticipation, the kind of feeling people probably get right before doing something extreme. Bungee jumping is already intense, even when everything goes right. You are trusting a cord, equipment, and strangers to keep you alive while you throw yourself off something high. That is the whole point of it. You do something your body is built to avoid and then trust that the safety system will catch you. But in my dream, the safety system did not save me. Something went wrong during the jump. I do not remember if the cord snapped, if it was attached wrong, or if there was some other accident. Dreams can be clear in feeling, but vague in detail. What I do remember is that I knew I died. It was not just a dream where I got scared and woke up before anything happened. I actually died in the dream. The whole event ended with me being killed during the bungee jump. It had that awful final feeling dreams can sometimes have, where even after you wake up, the emotion stays in your chest. When I woke up, I was unsettled. Not terrified in a screaming way, but bothered. It was one of those dreams that feels too specific. If I had dreamed about something I regularly thought about, maybe it would not have mattered. If I was always watching bungee jumping videos or talking about doing extreme sports, then sure, my brain could have easily pulled that image from something already on my mind. But bungee jumping was not something I thought about. It was not on my bucket list. It was not something I had recently discussed. It was not an activity I had ever seriously considered trying. It was just not part of my life. That made the dream feel random in a way that was uncomfortable. I remember waking up and thinking it was weird, but I probably still would have moved on from it if the morning had gone normally. Like most bad dreams, it might have faded if nothing connected to it had happened afterward. I would have gotten dressed, gone through the day, and maybe forgotten most of it within a week. But that is not what happened. The next morning, I walked out of my barracks room and had my usual conversation with my roommate. It was the kind of normal morning interaction we had all the time. Nothing dramatic, just us talking about the weekend and what we might do. Since he always wanted to go out and find something to get into, I was already expecting him to suggest something. Maybe a movie, a bar, a trip somewhere, food, whatever random idea crossed his mind. Then he told me his idea for that weekend. He wanted to go bungee jumping. The second he said it, my stomach dropped. It was not a slow reaction. It was immediate. I had just dreamed the night before that I died bungee jumping, and now, the very next morning, my roommate, who had no idea about the dream, was suggesting that exact activity. Not something similar. Not skydiving. Not a rope swing. Not a theme park. Bungee jumping. The same thing from the dream. The same thing that had killed me in the dream. I told him right away, fuck no. I'm not doing it. There was no hesitation. I did not laugh it off or pretend to think about it. I was not interested in being polite about it. The answer was no. My whole body rejected the idea before I even fully explained why. It felt like one of those moments where your instincts make the decision for you. I was not going to go anywhere near a bungee jump after the dream I had just had. Maybe that sounds dramatic, but in that moment it felt like common sense. He asked me why, so I told him about the dream. I explained that I had literally just dreamed the night before that I went bungee jumping and died in an accident. I told him I had never even been thinking about bungee jumping, and then suddenly I had a dream of it killing me, only for him to bring it up the next morning out of nowhere. I expected him to maybe laugh or tell me I was being paranoid. Usually, if I hesitated about going out or doing something random, he would push me. That was his style. He might call me boring, say I was overthinking, or tell me not to be scared. But this time, he did not do that. After I told him about the dream, he actually agreed with me. He basically said that after having a dream like that, he would not want to do it either. That reaction surprised me because it was not how he normally handled my hesitation. Usually, he would peer pressure me if I was unsure, but something about the timing must have seemed strange enough to him too. He understood why I was not willing to take the chance. So we decided to do something else. And maybe nothing would have happened if we had gone. That is the thing I still think about. Maybe the dream meant nothing. Maybe we would have gone bungee jumping, everything would have been safe, and we would have had a great time. Maybe I would have laughed later and said I was glad I did not let a dream scare me. There is no way to know. We did not go, so there is no alternate ending to compare it to. Maybe it was all just coincidence, and I avoided something perfectly harmless because my brain happened to make a nightmare out of a random activity. But I was not willing to test that. The scary part was not only that I dreamed about dying. People dream about dying all the time. People dream about car crashes, falling, being chased, drowning, or getting hurt in ways that never happen. A dream by itself is not always a warning. I understand that. I am not someone who thinks every dream has some hidden message from the universe. But this was different because bungee jumping was not something I had been thinking about. It was not connected to anything in my normal life. I had not been planning it. I had not been watching videos of it. I had not heard someone talk about it the day before, at least not that I remember. It came out of nowhere. Then, the very next morning, my roommate brought it up as his random weekend idea. That coincidence is what freaked me the hell out. It felt too direct, too specific. If I had dreamed about dying in a car accident and then someone asked if I wanted to go for a drive, that would not have been the same. Because driving is something people do all the time. If I had dreamed about drowning and then someone suggested going swimming, that might have been weird. But swimming is still common enough. Bungee jumping is not like that. It is not an everyday activity. It is not something most people randomly decide to do every weekend. For me, it was not even something that had ever really slipped into my mind as a serious possibility. That is what made it feel like a warning. I do not know if I believe in premonitions. I do not know if dreams can actually warn people about the future. Part of me thinks the brain is strange enough that maybe it can connect things in ways we do not understand. Maybe I had overheard something without consciously remembering it. Maybe my roommate had mentioned bungee jumping days or weeks earlier, and my brain stored it somewhere deep without me noticing. Then, maybe it came out in a dream, and when he mentioned it again the next day, it felt like a miracle or a warning, even though there was a normal explanation. That is possible, but I do not remember him ever mentioning it before. I do not remember bungee jumping being part of any conversation, and the timing still feels wrong in the most unsettling way. Dream one night, I die bungee jumping. Wake up the next morning, my best friend asks me to go bungee jumping. That is the kind of thing that makes you pause, no matter how logical you try to be. I also think about how my roommate reacted. He knew me. He knew I could be hesitant about random plans, and he usually pushed back when I said no. But that morning, after hearing the dream, he did not try to argue. He did not call me scared. He did not say, "Come on, man, it's just a dream." He accepted it. That made the whole thing feel even more serious, because it was not just me being paranoid. Even he seemed to understand that the coincidence was too uncomfortable to ignore. In a way, I am grateful for that. If he had pushed harder, maybe I would have felt pressured. Maybe I would have second-guessed myself. Maybe I would have gone just to avoid seeming scared. That happens more often than people admit, especially when you are younger and surrounded by friends who like doing bold or risky things. You do things you do not really want to do because you do not want to be the boring one or the scared one. But this time, he backed off. He respected the fact that the dream had shaken me, and I stayed away from it. I have never regretted that decision. Some people might say I let fear win, but I do not see it that way. Fear is not always bad. Sometimes fear is your mind's way of telling you to step back. Maybe the dream was just a random nightmare. Maybe it was not a message from anywhere. But it gave me a strong reason to say no to something I was already not deeply interested in doing. I did not owe bungee jumping anything. I did not have to prove I was brave. There was no reward worth ignoring that feeling. The older I get, the more I think people should trust themselves in moments like that. Not every fear is rational, but not every fear should be dismissed either. Sometimes your gut reaction is based on something you cannot explain. Maybe it is pattern recognition. Maybe it is memory. Maybe it is instinct. Maybe it is nothing at all. But if something feels wrong and the stakes are high, there is no shame in walking away. Bungee jumping is one of those activities where the stakes are obvious. It is not like deciding whether to try a new restaurant. If something goes wrong, it can go very wrong. That does not mean it is always unsafe, and I know plenty of people do it and are fine. There are professionals, equipment checks, safety rules, and all of that. I am not saying nobody should ever bungee jump. But for me, after that dream and that timing, the answer was simple. I was not going to do it. I still wonder sometimes what would have happened if we had gone. Maybe nothing. Maybe the only story would be that I had a scary dream and then faced my fear. Maybe I would have jumped, survived, and felt stupid for worrying. Or maybe something would have gone wrong. Maybe the dream was my brain, the universe, God, fate, or whatever you want to call it, giving me a warning. I do not know. And because I do not know, I am glad I did not find out. That is the uncomfortable thing about avoiding danger because of a feeling. You never get proof. If you go and something bad happens, everyone says you should have listened to the warning. If you do not go and nothing happens, people say it was probably nothing. The only result is that you are still alive and still wondering. There is no clear confirmation, just the memory of the moment and the decision you made. For me, the memory is still strong. I remember the dream. I remember the feeling of dying in it. I remember waking up unsettled. I remember walking out of my barracks room and having that normal morning chat with my roommate. I remember him casually suggesting bungee jumping like it was just another random weekend plan. I remember the immediate shock in my body, the way the dream came rushing back, and the certainty that I was not doing it. I remember telling him no. I remember explaining why. I remember him actually agreeing, even though he was usually the type to push. It was not the most dramatic paranormal story. There was no ghost, no shadow figure, no object moving by itself. It was just a dream and a coincidence. But sometimes coincidences are creepy because they are too precise. They line up in a way that feels personal, like something's trying to get your attention. And that is exactly how it felt to me. A random dream about dying during a bungee jump would have been strange but forgettable. A friend randomly suggesting bungee jumping would have been unusual but not scary. Both happening back to back, with him having no knowledge of the dream, was enough for me to say no and never question that choice. Maybe we would have been fine if we had gone. Maybe nothing bad would have happened at all. But after dreaming that the exact activity killed me the night before, I was not taking that chance. My old friend and I had known each other for years, and this happened when we were somewhere around 19 to 21 years old. We were at that age where we had enough freedom to go wherever we wanted, but not enough sense to always think through why we were going there. A lot of our nights were spent just driving around in the middle of nowhere in our home state, talking about life, listening to music, and seeing where the roads took us. We did not always have a plan. Most of the time, the whole point was not having one. He was driving that night, and I was in the passenger seat. It was late, dark, and quiet in the way only rural roads can be at night. When you get far enough away from town, everything changes. Streetlights disappear. Houses become rare. The darkness gets deeper. The road in front of you becomes the only thing that feels real, because the headlights are only showing you a small part of the world at a time. Everything outside that light feels like it could be empty, or it could be hiding something. We used to do this kind of thing all the time. We would drive down dirt roads, past fields and old farmhouses, through areas where there was nothing for miles. Sometimes we would talk nonstop, and sometimes we would sit in silence for a while. But most of the time, our conversations would eventually turn deep. We talked about life, meaning, the future, fear, dreams, death, religion, the universe, and all the things young people talk about when they are still trying to figure out who they are. He was one of those friends I could have real conversations with, the kind that could start with a joke and somehow turn into us talking about why people exist. That night, he decided we should try driving through a different area, somewhere we had not been before. That was normal for us. We liked finding new roads, especially ones that looked forgotten or strange. There was something exciting about taking a turn and not knowing what was ahead. It was not always safe or smart, but it felt adventurous. We were sober, completely sober, and just out looking for a new place to drive through. The area he chose looked eerie and cool at the same time. That is the best way I can describe it. There were cornfields everywhere, stretching out on both sides of the road. In the dark, cornfields have a way of feeling alive even when they are still. The stalks stand tall and close together, and you cannot see very far into them. They make the sides of the road feel like walls. During the day, a field might just look like a field, but at night, with only car headlights sliding over the edges, it can feel like something is standing there watching you from between the rows. The roads were dirt roads, rough and quiet, and the car lights kicked up little bits of dust as we drove. There were no signs of people around us. No gas stations, no shops, no bright houses, no other cars passing by. Just the road, the fields, and that heavy rural darkness. It was the kind of place where you feel far away from help, even if you are technically not that far from civilization. It felt empty enough that if something strange happened, no one else would know about it. We kept driving, talking like we usually did. I do not remember the exact conversation we were having right before it happened, but I know it was probably one of our deeper ones. That was what we did together. We would end up talking about fate, dreams, life, and all the strange things people experience. Maybe that is why what happened next hit so hard. We were already in that kind of mood, open to big questions and strange feelings, and then the road itself seemed to hand us one. Ahead of us, the dirt road came up to a T-section. It was one of those intersections where the road you are on ends, and you can only turn left or right. There was no way to keep going straight. The headlights reached forward and showed the shape of it, the road ending in front of us, the two choices waiting on either side. Left or right. It was simple, but the sight of it did something to me. As we got closer, a strange feeling came over me. I suddenly knew I had seen that place before. Not in real life, not during one of our other drives. I knew the areas we had been to when we went out into the middle of nowhere, and this was not one of them. We had not driven this road before. I was sure of that. But the T-section looked familiar in a way that went deeper than memory. It felt like a scene I had already stood inside, even though I had never physically been there. Then it hit me. I had seen it in a dream. I looked at my friend and said, "Hey, I have seen this before in my dreams." The second I said it, he stopped the car. Not slowly, not casually. He came to a full stop, right there in the road. It was sudden enough that the moment became serious immediately. He knew me well enough to understand I was not just saying something random for attention. We had talked about dreams before, about weird feelings, about the strange things that happen in life that seem to mean something even if you cannot explain them. So when I said I had seen that place before in a dream, he did not laugh it off. He asked me what happened. That is when I told him. I said that in the dream we took a left turn at that T-section, and after turning left, we saw a black, unmarked car sitting off to the side of the road. I said it as clearly as I could, because the memory was coming back to me fast. It was not a vague dream where I only remembered a feeling. I remembered the road. I remembered the turn. I remembered the black car. I remembered it sitting there in the dark, unmarked, with no clear reason to be there. The dream had been strange enough that it stayed somewhere in my mind, but I had not been thinking about it until that exact moment. Seeing the T-section pulled it back like someone had opened a locked drawer in my head. My friend sat there for a second, taking that in. Then he started driving again. We continued up to the T-section. I remember the tension in the car changing. Before, we were just two friends driving around at night. Now, every foot forward felt important. The road ahead no longer felt random. It felt like we were moving into something that had already happened once, somewhere else, in a dream. I could feel my heart starting to beat harder. Part of me wanted the dream to be wrong. Part of me wanted us to turn left and see nothing there, so we could laugh and say it was just a weird feeling. But another part of me was already bracing, because I knew what I had seen. He reached the intersection and started turning left. The headlights swung across the road as the car turned. And there it was. A black, unmarked car was sitting on the side of the road. The second our lights hit it, I knew. It was exactly what I had seen. Not close enough. Not kind of similar. That was the car. A dark, unmarked vehicle sitting there in the middle of nowhere, off to the side of the road, just like in my dream. No lights on. No clear reason for it to be there. No person standing beside it. No sign of life around it. Just a black car, waiting in the dark. I said, "That's the car." The fear and thrill that hit me in that moment are hard to describe. It was not just fear, like seeing something creepy on a dark road. It was the fear of reality, lining up with something it should not have known. It was the feeling of a dream stepping into the real world right in front of us. My mind was trying to process the odds. We had never been to that area before. My friend had chosen the road. I had said what we would see before we turned. Then the headlights showed the exact thing I had described. My friend reacted immediately. He said something like, "Fuck this," and peeled out. He wanted to get away from there as fast as possible, and I cannot blame him. From his point of view, we had just driven into a place I claimed to know from a dream, and the first thing I predicted was sitting exactly where I said it would be. The safest instinct was to leave. Most people would have done the same. A black, unmarked car sitting in the middle of nowhere at night is already uncomfortable. Add the dream part, and it becomes something else completely. But I reacted differently. I told him no. I said we had to stop. I know that sounds crazy, but in that moment, curiosity was stronger than fear for me. The chance of all of that coming together felt impossibly small. We were in a new area. It was nighttime. We were on dirt roads surrounded by cornfields. I had never physically been there before, yet I had described the left turn and the black car before we saw it. To me, that meant we had to find out why. I felt like we had stumbled onto something important, something that might never happen again. I wanted to understand it while it was still happening. I told him we needed to figure out why something like that was out there. But he was not having it. He kept driving, and the car disappeared behind us into the darkness. I watched it as long as I could, my body full of adrenaline. Part of me wanted to grab the wheel, not to fight him, but just because I could not stand the feeling of leaving without answers. Another part of me knew he was probably being smarter than I was. There are plenty of normal dangers in the middle of nowhere at night. That black car could have belonged to anyone. It could have been police, someone hiding, someone waiting, someone broken down, or someone who did not want to be found. Stopping might have been a terrible idea, but even knowing that, I still wanted to stop. If I had been driving, we would have stopped. I am sure of that. I would have pulled over, even if my hands were shaking. I would have wanted to see if anyone was inside. I would have wanted to know whether it was empty. I would have wanted to see if there was a reason it matched my dream. Maybe that would have been the wrong choice. Maybe my friends saved us from something dangerous by leaving. Or maybe we missed the only chance we would ever have to understand what happened. I will never know. That is the part that stays with me most. I will never know. The whole experience is burned into my memory. I can still see the T-section road. I can still see the cornfields on both sides, dark and tall. I can still feel the car coming to a full stop when I said I had seen the place in a dream. I can still hear my friend asking what happened. I can still remember telling him about the left turn and the black unmarked car. I can still feel the headlights swinging left and landing on that exact car sitting by the side of the road. And I can still feel the rush in my chest when I realized the dream had matched reality. I cannot explain it. I have tried. Maybe I had been there before and forgot. But I knew the areas we had driven through in the middle of nowhere, and this was not one of them. We were always exploring, but I had a good sense of where we had been. This place was new to us. Maybe I had seen a similar road somewhere else, and my brain connected it to the moment. But that does not explain the car. Maybe black unmarked cars are not rare, and maybe it was just a coincidence. But the timing, the turn, the exact placement, and the fact that I said it before we saw it made it feel like much more than that. Maybe I had dreamed something vague, and my mind filled in the details after the fact. That is another possible explanation. Memory can be tricky. People remember dreams strangely. Maybe I had not remembered the dream as clearly until I saw the car, and then my brain made it feel like I had predicted it. But my friend heard me say it before we turned. He stopped the car and asked me what happened, and I told him before we saw it. That is what prevents me from writing it off as a memory trick. He was there. He heard the prediction before the headlights revealed the car. We were both sober. That matters too. There were no drugs, no alcohol, nothing that would make us see things or misread the moment in some obvious way. We were just two young adults, driving around on back roads, having the kind of deep conversations we always had. The whole thing happened in a clear state of mind. That does not make it impossible to explain, but it removes the easy explanation that we were messed up or imagining things. The black car itself still bothers me. Why was it there? Who was in it, if anyone? Was it parked because someone had car trouble? Was it someone watching the road? Was it law enforcement? Was it abandoned? Was it connected to the dream in some meaningful way? Or was it only there by chance? The fact that it was unmarked made it worse. If it had been a regular car with someone sitting inside, maybe it would have felt less strange. But the way it sat there, dark and silent at the side of a rural road, made it feel like it belonged to the dream more than the real world. I also wonder what my dream had been trying to show me, if it was trying to show me anything at all. Was it a warning? Was it just a preview of a random moment? Was it something my brain somehow picked up before it happened? I do not know. People talk about déjà vu, but this felt stronger than that. Déjà vu is usually a feeling, a strange sense that you have been somewhere before. This was more specific. I did not just feel like I had seen the road. I knew what would be there after the left turn, and then it was there. That is what made it terrifying. It was not just the black car. It was the match between dream and reality. There was also a strange thrill in it, and I will be honest about that. Fear was there, definitely. But so was excitement. For a second, it felt like we had touched something impossible, like the world had glitched or opened a little and let us see behind it. It scared me, but it also made me want to know more. That is why I wanted to stop. I did not want to run away from the only proof I had that something strange had just happened. I wanted to face it, even if that was stupid. My friend chose survival. I chose curiosity, at least in my head. Since he was driving, survival won. Maybe that was for the best. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if we had stopped. We could have walked up to the car and found it empty, and then maybe the whole thing would have become even stranger. We could have found someone inside who needed help. We could have found a police officer or a farmer or someone who had every right to be there. Or we could have found something we were not supposed to find. That is the part that makes me glad in a way that I was not driving. Wanting answers does not always mean you should go looking for them. Still, the unknown bothers me. The memory is engraved in my brain because it never resolved. We saw the car, he peeled out, and that was it. No explanation, no return trip, no follow-up. Just a moment on a rural road where a dream and reality lined up too perfectly. And then we left before we could understand why. That kind of thing stays with you because your mind keeps trying to finish the story. It keeps asking what was in the car, why it was there, and what would have happened if we had stayed. I will never forget the feeling in my heart that night. It was a mix of thrill and fear so strong that I can still feel a shadow of it when I think about it. The dark road, the cornfields, the T-section, the left turn, the black car. All of it is still there in my memory like a scene from a movie I cannot stop replaying. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was some kind of déjà vu. Maybe dreams are stranger than we understand. I do not know. All I know is that I told my friend what we would see before we saw it. And when we turned left, the black, unmarked car from my dream was sitting right there on the side of the road. My friend got us out of there as fast as he could. I wanted to stop and find out why it was there. If I had been driving, we would have stopped. And maybe that is why I am still left wondering. I dated a guy who had been through something no person should ever have to carry. He had a 6-year-old nephew who died while he was in his care. It was a tragic farm accident, the kind of accident that happens fast and leaves everyone around it broken in ways that do not heal easily. I do not want to go too far into the details of the accident itself, because the most important part of this story is not the accident. It is what that loss did to him afterward, and the strange thing that happened years later. He loved that little boy. That was obvious. Even when he did not talk about it directly, the grief was there. Some people carry guilt loudly. They talk about it all the time, replay every second, and say over and over what they should have done differently. Other people carry it quietly, like a weight under their skin. He was somewhere in between. Sometimes he would talk about it, and when he did, you could hear how much it had destroyed him. Other times, he would shut down, and the sadness would just sit in the room with us, even if nobody said anything. The hardest part for him was that the child had died while he was supposed to be looking after him. That kind of guilt is cruel, because it does not always care about the truth. Even if something is an accident, even if nobody could have stopped it, the mind still finds ways to blame itself. It asks the same questions again and again. What if I had looked sooner? What if I had been standing closer? What if I had said no? What if I had taken him somewhere else? What if I had noticed one small thing before it happened? Those questions do not bring anyone back, but they can torture a person for years. And he was tortured by it. He struggled terribly for a long time. There were days when he seemed like he was still standing in the same moment, unable to move forward. I think part of him felt like he did not deserve peace because the little boy did not get to grow up. He could laugh sometimes, and he could function, but underneath it was this deep pain that never really left him. It was not just grief. It was grief mixed with guilt, and guilt can make grief feel endless. When you are close to someone carrying something like that, you realize there are limits to what you can do. You can listen. You can comfort them. You can remind them it was an accident. You can tell them they are not responsible in the way they think they are. But if they do not believe it inside themselves, your words only go so far. He could hear people tell him it was not his fault, but hearing it and accepting it are two very different things. He needed something deeper than reassurance from friends or family. He needed something that could reach the part of him that still believed he had failed. Eventually, we were no longer together. Life moved on in the normal, messy way it does. People separate, relationships end, and you keep going. I still knew about that part of his life, though. You do not forget something like that about a person. Even after we were not together anymore, I hoped he would find some kind of peace. I hoped he would be able to forgive himself, or at least learn how to live without that guilt eating him alive every day. About 5 years later, I ran into him again. It was one of those unexpected meetings where you suddenly see someone from your past and a whole part of your life comes rushing back. He looked older, of course, but not just in the normal way people age. He had that look people get after life has been heavy on them. Still, there was something different about him, too. He seemed changed, but I could not immediately tell how. We started talking, catching up a little, and eventually he told me about something that had happened to him. At the time, he was working as a supervisor for a company that was doing a project out in the fields, far out in the middle of nowhere. It was not a busy construction site in a city or a place with people walking around everywhere. It was rural, open, and isolated. There were fields around them, and his employees were nearby doing their work. It was the kind of place where you can see a long way in every direction, depending on the land, and where a stranger approaching would usually stand out. There were no crowds, no sidewalks, no stores, no normal foot traffic. Just workers, vehicles, equipment, and open land. He was sitting in his truck doing paperwork while the employees worked nearby. That was part of his job. As the supervisor, he had to handle forms, notes, schedules, or whatever paperwork came with the project. So he was in the truck, probably using it as a temporary office, with the fields outside and the workers not too far away. It was an ordinary workday in an ordinary place, at least at first. Then someone knocked on his truck window. That alone must have been a little surprising, because they were out in the fields, not parked outside a store. He looked up and saw an old man standing there. The man appeared to be homeless, or at least that was the impression he gave. He did not look like one of the workers. He did not look like someone connected to the project. He was just suddenly there at the truck window, out in the middle of nowhere. My friend opened the window. The old man did not ask for money. He did not ask for directions. He did not seem confused or lost. Instead, he said something very simple. "Please take this. I think you need it." Then he handed him a small card. It was one of those little prayer cards, the kind you might find in a church or receive from someone religious. On it was a picture of a guardian angel, along with a prayer. It was small enough to fit in a hand, but what it meant in that moment was much bigger than the card itself. My friend looked down at it only briefly, just long enough to see what it was. A guardian angel. A prayer. A message of protection, comfort, and maybe forgiveness. Then he looked back up to speak to the old man. But the man was gone, not walking away in the distance, not standing near another vehicle, not moving across the field. Gone, that was the part that made the whole thing strange. They were in an open field in the middle of nowhere. His employees were nearby. If an old man had walked up to the truck, someone should have seen him. If he had walked away, someone should have seen that too. He was not in a crowded parking lot where a person could disappear behind a group of people. There were fields, open space, workers nearby. A man appearing and disappearing like that did not make sense. My friend asked around, or at least paid attention to whether anyone had seen him. Nobody had. No one saw the old man approach the truck. No one saw him walking away through the field. No one noticed where he came from or where he went. It was as if he had appeared only long enough to hand over that card and say those words, then vanished before anyone else could register him. Now, I know there are always possible explanations. Maybe the old man was just someone passing through who somehow moved faster or more quietly than anyone expected. Maybe he came from a direction nobody was watching and left the same way. Maybe the workers were too focused on their tasks to notice him. Maybe there was some road, tree line, ditch, or structure nearby that made it easier for him to disappear than it sounds. I understand that. I am not saying there is absolutely no possible normal explanation. But to my friend, it did not feel normal. And honestly, after everything he had been through, the timing and message were hard to ignore. This was a man who had carried terrible guilt over the death of a child. A little boy had died in his care, and that had haunted him for years. Then, out in the middle of nowhere, an unknown old man appeared at his truck window and handed him a card with a guardian angel on it, saying, "I think you need it. Not do you want this? Not I'm handing these out. Not have a nice day." He said he thought my friend needed it. And he did. He really did. That small card hit him in a place that normal words had not been able to reach. It felt personal to him. It felt like someone, somewhere, knew what he was carrying. It felt like the message was not random. The guardian angel on the card made him think of his nephew. It made him think of protection, of the afterlife, of the possibility that the little boy was not lost in the way grief had made him feel. Maybe it made him feel that his nephew was safe. Maybe it made him feel that the child was watched over. Maybe it made him feel that forgiveness was possible. I cannot speak for exactly what happened inside him, but I know he described it as a powerful, healing moment. That is what matters most to me about the story. Whether the old man was a real person, an angel, a messenger, or something else, the effect was real. My friend had been carrying a wound for years, and that moment gave him something he desperately needed. It did not erase what happened. Nothing could do that. It did not bring the child back. It did not make the accident less tragic. But it gave him a moment of peace, maybe the first real peace he had felt in a long time. Sometimes people need a sign more than they need an explanation. He had probably heard all the logical comfort people could offer. He had probably been told many times that it was not his fault, that accidents happen, that he could not keep punishing himself forever. But those words had not fully healed him. Then a stranger appeared in a field, handed him a guardian angel card, and told him he needed it. For whatever reason, that reached him. It gave him permission to feel something other than guilt. I think about that old man a lot when I remember the story. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why was he there, in that field, at that exact time? How did he know my friend needed that card? Did he say that to everyone he met? Or was there something specific about my friend that made him choose those words? Was he just a kind old man with a stack of prayer cards, giving them to people he felt drawn to? Or was he something else entirely? The fact that no one else saw him makes it even stranger. On a job site, even in a field, people notice things. A random old man walking up to the supervisor's truck should have drawn at least one person's attention. People look around. They notice movement. They notice strangers, especially in the middle of nowhere, where there are not many people passing by. But according to my friend, nobody saw him arrive and nobody saw him leave. That detail turns the story from unusual to something that feels almost otherworldly. I am not saying I know what he was. I do not. But I understand why my friend felt the way he did. If you are carrying grief and guilt that deep, and someone appears out of nowhere to hand you a card with a guardian angel on it, it is hard not to feel like something bigger is happening. Maybe it was the universe. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was the child's spirit. Maybe it was just a stranger whose timing was so perfect that it became meaningful. Whatever it was, it mattered. There are moments in life when a small thing becomes huge because of where it lands in your heart. A tiny card with a prayer on it might mean nothing to one person. They might take it, thank the stranger, and throw it in a drawer. But to someone drowning in guilt over a child's death, that same card can feel like a lifeline. The picture of a guardian angel can feel like a message. The words I think you needed can feel like someone has finally seen the pain they have been hiding. And he had been hiding pain for years. That was the part I recognized when he told me. This was not a man being dramatic over a random event. This was someone who had suffered deeply, and for some reason, that encounter gave him relief. I could see that it had changed something in him. Not fixed everything, maybe, but shifted it. Some of the heaviness had moved. The guilt that had wrapped around him for so long had loosened a little. I think healing sometimes comes in strange forms. Not always through therapy, though therapy can help. Not always through family, religion, or time, though those can help too. Sometimes healing comes through a moment you could not have planned. A sentence from a stranger. A song at the right time. A dream. A sign. A card passed through a truck window by someone who disappears before you can ask who they are. Maybe that sounds too sentimental, but I believe it can happen. Not necessarily because every strange encounter is supernatural, but because meaning has power. If something helps a broken person breathe again, then it matters. If it helps someone forgive themselves enough to keep living, then it matters. Whether the old man was human or something beyond human, the result was the same. My friend felt touched by something kind. And after a tragedy like that, kindness can feel like a miracle. I also think about the guardian angel image. That was not just any card. It was not a random advertisement, a business card, or a note with a quote. It was a guardian angel. For a man haunted by the death of a 6-year-old child, that image must have landed with incredible force. Maybe it suggested that his nephew was protected now. Maybe it suggested that the boy's spirit was okay. Maybe it suggested that my friend was being watched over too, even though he had felt undeserving of comfort for so long. I cannot imagine how much he needed to believe that. When a child dies, especially in an accident, everyone looks for someone or something to blame. It is human nature. But sometimes, accidents are exactly that. Accidents. Awful, unfair, life-shattering accidents. The people left behind still carry the burden because love makes us feel responsible for the people we could not save. My friend had been carrying that burden for years, and it had nearly crushed him. That small card did not change the facts, but it may have changed the story he was telling himself. Maybe he could finally begin to believe that the boy was not angry with him. Maybe he could believe he was forgiven. That is powerful. I do not know what I would have thought if I had been there. If I had seen the old man myself, maybe I would have tried to follow him. Maybe I would have asked the workers if they saw where he went. Maybe I would have looked around the field for tracks or a road or some sign of him. But my friend only had the moment as it happened. Knock on the window. Old man, please take this. I think you need it. Guardian angel card. Look down. Look back up. Gone, some experiences are so brief that they almost feel like they should not be allowed to change a person. But they do. This one did. My friend did not describe it like a scary haunting. He did not make it sound like a horror story. It was not that kind of encounter. It was strange, yes, unexplainable, maybe, but more than anything, it was healing. It felt like grace, or comfort, or a message arriving in the only way he might have been able to accept it. People had probably tried to comfort him many times before, but this came from outside his normal life. It came unexpectedly, in a field from someone he could not identify. That made it feel larger than ordinary comfort. When he told me, I could tell it still meant a lot to him. He was not just repeating a weird story for entertainment. He was sharing something that had touched the deepest wound in him. And because I knew what that wound was, I understood why it mattered so much. This was not about proving angels exist or proving life after death. It was about a grieving man receiving something at the exact moment in the exact form that he needed. I still do not know what the old man was. Maybe he was just a homeless man with a kind heart who somehow ended up in a field at the right time. Maybe he had no idea how meaningful that card would be. Maybe he saw something in my friend's face and felt moved to give it to him. That alone would be beautiful enough. Or maybe he was something more. Maybe he was a messenger. Maybe he was an angel. Maybe he was connected to the child in some way none of us can understand. Maybe he appeared because my friend had carried guilt long enough, and something finally stepped in to help him lay a little of it down. I cannot prove any of that. I can only say that the old man came, gave him the card, and vanished before anyone else saw him. And after years of guilt, my friend felt something inside him begin to heal. That is the whole story. A man I once dated had lived for years with the pain of a 6-year-old nephew dying in a tragic farm accident while in his care. About 5 years later, while supervising work in the middle of nowhere, he sat in his truck doing paperwork. An old man appeared at his window, handed him a small guardian angel prayer card, and said, "Please take this. I think you need it." My friend looked down at the card, then looked back up, and the man was gone. None of the workers saw him arrive. None of them saw him leave. And somehow, that tiny card gave my friend a kind of peace he had needed for a long, long time. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. When I was younger, I lived in what I honestly believe was a very haunted house. I have mentioned it a lot before because that house gave me more strange experiences than any other place I have ever lived. I know people say things like that easily, and I know not everyone believes in haunted houses, but that place had a feeling to it that I could never fully explain. It was not just one odd noise or one weird shadow in a corner. It was the kind of house where strange things happened often enough that you eventually stopped treating them as random. You would hear things, see things, feel watched, or notice something out of place. And after a while, it became part of living there. I had a lot of weird stuff happen to me in that house. Some of it was small, the kind of thing you might try to brush off if it only happened once. A sound from an empty room. The feeling that someone was standing behind you when no one was there. A door or object moving in a way that did not seem right. Other things were stronger and harder to ignore. The house always seemed to have some kind of energy in it, especially at night. It did not feel empty when it should have felt empty. Even when I was alone, I often had the sense that I was not the only thing there. Because so many odd things happened in that house, it is hard to pick the strangest one. But there is one experience that still stands out more than the others. It happened during a rainstorm. And even now, years later, I still do not know what to make of it. It was not like seeing a full ghost standing in the hallway, and it was not a voice calling my name. It was something physical, something connected to the storm outside, and the timing was so perfect that it still bothers me. That night, the weather was terrible. It was not just a little rain. It was a real storm, with strong wind, heavy rain, and that wild feeling in the air where everything outside seems out of control. The wind was pushing hard against the house, making the walls and windows creak. Rain kept hitting the glass in uneven bursts, sometimes soft and steady, then suddenly loud when the wind threw it sideways. The whole house felt like it was being shaken by the weather. You could hear branches moving outside, the trees bending and scraping, and the storm rolling over everything. My bedroom window faced a tree line. During the day, those trees were just part of the view. They were normal, familiar, and not something I thought about much. But at night, especially during a storm, that tree line looked different. The branches turned into dark shapes. The leaves moved like something alive. When the wind was strong, the whole line of trees would sway and twist, and the shadows outside my window would shift constantly. It made the room feel less private, like the outside world was pressing right up against the glass. That night, the wind was so strong that tree limbs kept hitting my bedroom window. At first, I tried to ignore it. Branches hitting a window during a storm are not exactly unusual. It happens. The wind blows, the trees move, and if the branches are close enough, they tap or scrape against the glass. But this was not just one little branch brushing the window once or twice. It kept happening. Over and over, the limbs hit the glass or scraped against it, and each time it pulled me back from sleep. I was exhausted. That is another important part of the story. I had been running on only a few hours of sleep for days. I do not remember exactly why I had been sleeping so little, but I remember how tired I was. It was the kind of tired where your body feels heavy, your patience is gone, and every little sound becomes 10 times more annoying than it should be. I was not in the mood to be scared or curious. I just wanted to sleep. I wanted the storm to be background noise, something I could drift off to, but the tree limbs hitting my window kept snapping me awake. At first, I pulled the covers up and tried to settle down again. I probably turned over a few times, trying to find a position where the sound would bother me less. But each time I felt myself getting close to sleep, another branch would hit the window. Tap, scratch, thud. Sometimes it was light enough to sound like fingernails scraping the glass. Other times it was a heavier hit that made me wonder if one of the branches might eventually crack the window. It was irritating, and because I was so tired, irritation turned into anger, fast. The storm outside was already loud, but the window noises felt personal somehow. I know that sounds strange, but when you are exhausted and trying to sleep, a repeated noise can start to feel like it is happening on purpose. The wind could have pushed those branches anywhere, but it kept pushing them into my window. My room was dark, the rain was coming down. The house had that haunted feeling it always had, and I was lying there with my nerves completely worn thin. Finally, I snapped. Out of pure annoyance, I yelled something like, "I wish someone would block those damn tree limbs from hitting my fucking window." I was not saying it as a prayer. I was not asking anything in the house for help. I was not trying to summon anything or speak to whatever might have been there. I was just tired, angry, and frustrated. It was one of those things you shout into the room when you have had enough. I did not expect anything to happen. I did not think anyone or anything would answer. I just wanted the noise to stop. And yelling was the only thing I could do in that moment. But right after I said it, something happened. I saw a large tree limb come toward my window. This was not one of the small branches that had been tapping and scraping before. This was a much bigger limb, and it came close enough to scare me instantly. It was pushed by the wind toward the glass, and for a second I thought it was going to hit hard enough to break through. The limb was large enough that if it had gone through the window, it could have caused serious damage. It could have shattered glass all over my room. It could have hit me, or at least filled the room with rain, broken wood, and pieces of the storm. The sight of it coming so close made my stomach drop. I remember that first flash of fear clearly. A second earlier, I had only been annoyed. Then suddenly, I was wide awake and staring at this huge branch coming right at my window. It was only inches away. Close enough that I thought, this is it. This thing is going through the glass. I was too tired and too shocked to do anything useful. I did not jump out of bed or run. I just watched it come toward me, frozen by the sudden change from irritation to danger. Then, all of a sudden, I saw a massive shadow. That is the part I cannot explain. The shadow appeared right near the window, large and dark, bigger than anything I expected to see outside. It was not just the shadow of the branch itself. At least it did not look that way to me. It looked like something huge moved between the window and the storm, something dark and solid enough to block the view for a moment. I do not remember seeing a clear shape like a person, an animal, or a hand. It was more like a large, dark form, a sudden mass of shadow, appearing exactly where the branch was about to hit. And then, the tree limb flew back. Not fell, not slowly drifted away. It flew back into the tree line. It moved away from my window so sharply that it looked like something had forced it back. The branch that had been inches from the glass was suddenly thrown away from the house, back toward the trees. The motion was so strange that I just stared. The wind had been pushing the branches toward the window all night, but this movement looked like the opposite. It looked like the limb had been shoved or pulled back against the direction it had been going. One moment it was about to hit, and the next it was gone, thrown back into the darkness. I sat there, stunned. The whole thing had happened so fast that my mind could not catch up right away. I had yelled for someone to block the tree limbs. Immediately after, a huge branch came inches from my window. Then a massive shadow appeared, and the branch flew back into the tree line. It felt like something had responded to what I said. That was the part that made the coincidence feel almost impossible. If the branch had simply missed the window on its own, maybe I could have called it luck. If the storm had kept going exactly the same after that, maybe I could have brushed it off as a strange wind gust. But that is not what happened. Right after the branch flew back, the storm began to slow down. The violent wind eased. The wild movement outside started calming. The storm did not stop completely, but it changed. It turned into steady rain, the kind that can actually be relaxing when you are trying to sleep. The hard gusts died down. The branches stopped slamming into the window. The whole atmosphere outside shifted from chaotic to calm in a way that felt too sudden. That made the whole thing even stranger. It was like the moment I yelled, the storm gave one final push. Something unseen pushed back, And then everything settled. I know how that sounds. I know storms change all the time. Wind comes in waves. A strong gust can push a branch one way, then another gust can pull it back. Weather can seem dramatic and perfectly timed without meaning anything. I understand that. If someone else told me this story, I might say it was probably just a change in wind direction. That is the reasonable explanation. But being there felt different. The timing was too perfect. I had been lying there for a while, listening to branches hit my window again and again. I was exhausted, angry, and finally shouted that I wished someone would block them. Right after that, the biggest branch of the night came close to hitting the window, so close that I thought it might break through. Then a huge shadow appeared, the branch flew back, and the storm calmed down into normal rain. It all happened right after I said those words. To this day, I do not know why that limb missed my window. Maybe the wind shifted at exactly the right second. Maybe the branch bent back because of its own weight or tension. Maybe the shadow was another branch, or the way lightning or outside light moved across the window. Maybe my tired brain, running on only a few hours of sleep, saw the moment more dramatically than it really happened. I have considered all of that. I know I was exhausted, and exhaustion can make things feel strange. It can sharpen fear, distort shadows, and make coincidences feel meaningful. But I also know what I saw. I saw the branch coming. I saw how close it got. I saw the shadow. I saw the limb fly back. And I heard the storm calm down right after. Living in that house made it harder to dismiss because strange things had happened there before. If this had happened in a totally normal house where nothing weird ever occurred, maybe I would be more willing to say it was just weather and tired eyes. But that house already felt haunted to me. I had already had enough experiences there to feel like something was present. So when I yelled into the room and something seemed to answer, it did not feel as impossible as it might have somewhere else. It felt like another entry in the long list of weird things that house did. The most unsettling part is that I had not asked for anything nice or gentle. I had yelled in frustration. I was irritated and swearing, basically demanding that someone stop the branches from hitting my window. And then, something seemed to stop them. That should have felt comforting, maybe, like something protected me from the branch. But it did not fully feel comforting. It felt too strange. If something had blocked that limb, what was it? Why was it there? Had it been there the whole time, watching or listening? Did it help because I asked, or did it just happen to line up that way? Those questions are what made the experience stay with me. I remember lying there afterward, listening to the steady rain and trying to decide whether I should feel relieved or scared. On one hand, the noise had stopped. The tree limbs were no longer hitting the window. The huge branch had not broken the glass. The storm had eased. Everything I had wanted a minute earlier had happened. On the other hand, the way it happened made me feel like I had spoken into the dark, and the dark had answered. That is not a normal feeling. There is something deeply uncomfortable about thinking something unseen might be listening in your room. Even if it helps you, even if it protects you, the idea still makes your skin crawl. You start to wonder what else it hears. You wonder if it is always there, or if it only shows up sometimes. You wonder whether you should thank it, fear it, ignore it, or pretend nothing happened. I did not know what to do, so I did nothing. I just stayed in bed, wide awake now, staring toward the window. The steady rain continued. After the chaos of the storm, that sound should have been peaceful, but I was too unsettled to relax right away. My mind kept replaying the moment over and over, my own voice shouting in frustration. The limb coming in fast, the shadow, the branch flying back, the storm calming. Every time I tried to explain it normally, the timing bothered me again. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because I was exhausted. But the memory stayed. It became one of those stories I would bring up when talking about that house because it was so strange and specific. Other experiences in that house might have been easier for people to question. Sounds, feelings, shadows, weird little events. But this one had a physical part to it. A branch nearly hit my window. Something seemed to stop it. And then the weather changed. I am not saying I know for sure that a ghost or spirit protected me. I cannot prove that. I do not have a video. I do not have another person who saw it with me. It was just me in my room during a storm, tired and annoyed, seeing something that might have been a wild coincidence. But I also cannot honestly say it felt normal. It did not. It felt like the house, or something in it, reacted to me. Some people might say it was my mind making a story out of weather. And maybe it was. Storms are unpredictable. Wind can whip branches around in strange ways. A big shadow could have been made by the branch itself or another tree moving outside. A sudden decrease in wind can happen naturally. All of that is possible. I do not deny it. But there is a difference between an explanation being possible and an explanation feeling right. The normal explanation has never fully felt right to me. What makes it so strange is how everything happened in order. The branches were bothering me. I yelled for someone to block them. The largest branch came close to hitting the window. A shadow appeared. The branch was thrown back. The storm slowed. The knocking and scraping stopped. That sequence feels almost too clean, like a response. That is why I still think about it. And honestly, if something did stop that branch, I do not know whether to be grateful or scared. Maybe both. Because yes, it kept the branch from crashing through my window. But it also suggested that something large enough, or strong enough, or present enough to affect what was outside my room might have been nearby. In a house I already believed was haunted, that thought is not exactly comforting. That house had always made me feel like there were things happening just outside the edge of normal life. Most of the time, those things were small enough to ignore if I tried hard enough. But that stormy night felt different. It felt like something crossed the line from being a presence or a feeling into affecting the real world. Maybe that is why I call it the weirdest thing that ever happened to me there. It was not the scariest in a simple way, but it was the hardest to explain. I still remember the window facing the tree line. I remember the sound of the branches hitting the glass over and over. I remember how tired and irritated I was after days of barely sleeping. I remember shouting into the room because I had finally had enough. I remember the huge limb coming so close that I thought it was going to break through. I remember the massive shadow. I remember the limb flying backward into the trees. And I remember the storm calming down into steady rain immediately after. Maybe it was all a crazy coincidence. Maybe the wind shifted at the perfect second. Maybe my tired brain made the shadow look bigger and stranger than it really was. Or maybe, in that very haunted house, something heard me and decided to help. I still do not know the reason that tree limb missed my window, but I know it did. And the timing, right after what I yelled, was so strange that I have never been able to forget it. My sister and brother-in-law were living in an apartment complex at the time, and they had become friends with a family who lived close by. It was one of those apartment situations where people see each other often enough that they slowly become part of each other's lives. You pass each other outside, talk for a few minutes. Maybe the kids play together. And before long, the people nearby are not just neighbors anymore. They become friends, or at least familiar faces you care about more than you expected to. This family had kids, and one of their children was a little boy I had been around a few times. Whenever I saw him, he always seemed happy. He was one of those kids who had a bright, open energy, the kind of child who made it easy to like him. He was friendly with me, and we got along well. I was not his parent or anything like that, but I had enough small interactions with him that I remembered him warmly. When a child is cheerful and comfortable around you, it sticks in your mind. You remember their little smiles, the way they talk, the way they act like the world is still simple and safe. Then, something terrible happened. The child died because a dresser fell on him. It was one of those awful accidents that does not sound real when you first hear it. A dresser. A normal piece of furniture. Something every home has. Something people walk past every day without thinking of it as dangerous. And yet, in one horrible moment, it became deadly. That is what makes accidents like that so frightening. It is not some faraway danger or something dramatic that only happens in movies. It is something ordinary inside a home around children, where people are supposed to be safe. When I heard what happened, it bothered me deeply. Even if I had not known the family extremely well, I had known that child. I had seen him alive. I had seen him happy. I had interacted with him. He was not just a story or a name. He was a real little person I could picture. That made the tragedy feel heavier. It is always sad when a child dies, but when you have actually been around that child, even a little, the mind has something to hold on to. You do not just think a kid died. You think of that specific child, the one who smiled, the one who seemed happy, the one who should still be here. After his death, the mood around the apartment complex changed. Even if people did not talk about it constantly, there was a sadness in the background. A child dying near you changes the feeling of a place. The buildings look the same. The walkways are the same. The doors and windows are the same. But the area does not feel normal anymore. You know something terrible happened close by. You know a family is grieving behind one of those doors. You know that a small life ended in a place where people still have to keep living. Sometime after the child's death, I was at my sister's apartment. I was in her room watching TV. I remember that part clearly because of what happened next. I was not watching anything serious or related to death, accidents, or children. I was watching TMZ. That is what makes the whole thing so strange. TMZ is celebrity gossip, entertainment news, scandals, pop culture, random stories about famous people, things like that. It is not usually the kind of channel where you expect to suddenly see something connected to a personal tragedy from your real life. I was sitting there watching normally, not thinking anything unusual was going to happen. The TV was just on, and I was probably only half paying attention at first. That is how people watch shows like that sometimes. It is background noise. You look up when something catches your interest, then look away again. Nothing about the moment felt important. I was not trying to contact anyone. I was not thinking about ghosts. I was not watching a documentary about accidents or child safety. It was just a normal moment in my sister's room with the television playing. Then suddenly, I realized what I was seeing on the screen. On the TV, there was a dresser falling on a baby doll toy. It was not just any random image, either. It looked like a recreation of exactly the kind of accident people had described when they talked about what happened to the child. The dresser tipped over, and the baby doll was underneath it, like someone was demonstrating how a dresser could fall on a child. The doll was the kind of baby doll kids play with, which made the image even more disturbing. It was not a real child, obviously, but because of what had happened nearby, my mind immediately connected it to the little boy. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. It felt wrong in a way I cannot fully explain. It was already hard enough knowing that this child had died because of a dresser falling on him. Then, after his death, I was watching TV in my sister's room, and out of nowhere, there was a scene showing a dresser falling on a baby doll in a way that looked just like the accident people had described. It was too specific, too close, too strange to ignore. I know there could be a normal explanation. Maybe TMZ was covering some celebrity-related story about child safety, a lawsuit, a product warning, or something involving a dresser accident. Maybe the clip was part of a larger segment I did not fully catch. Maybe it was not meant to connect to the child I knew at all. TV shows use reenactments and demonstrations sometimes. It is possible that what I saw had a completely ordinary reason for being on the screen. But the timing and the channel made it feel so strange. Why would something like that be on TMZ? That is the part I still cannot explain. If I had been watching the news, a safety program, or a documentary, it might have made more sense. There are reports about furniture safety, accidents involving children, and warnings for parents. But TMZ? A celebrity gossip show? It felt out of place. I could not understand why they would be showing a recreation of a dresser falling on a baby doll. Even now, when I think back on it, that detail bothers me more than anything. The image itself was upsetting enough, but the connection to real life made it worse. It was like seeing a private tragedy suddenly replayed in a strange, artificial way on a television screen. A dresser. A baby doll. The same kind of accident. A child I had known. It felt like the world had taken something painful and put a distorted version of it in front of me without warning. I remember feeling confused before I felt anything else. My brain tried to catch up with what I was watching. I kept thinking, why is this on TV? Why am I seeing this right now? What are the chances? It was not like I had searched for anything related to the accident. I had not chosen a program about it. I had not been talking about it right before. I was just sitting there, and then that image appeared. That kind of coincidence can feel almost aggressive. It makes you feel like the universe is pointing at something you are trying not to think about. Maybe it is not actually a sign. Maybe it is just random. But in the moment, it does not feel random. It feels personal because the connection is personal to you. Someone else watching that same TV segment might have thought nothing of it. They might have seen a safety demonstration or a weird clip and moved on. But for me, because of what had happened to that child, the image landed with a force that would not have landed for most people. I could not stop thinking about the little boy. I thought about how happy he had always seemed when I was around. I thought about how young he was. I thought about how unfair it was that something so ordinary had taken his life. I thought about his family, nearby, living with a pain most people cannot even imagine. And now I was looking at a baby doll on TV under a dresser, almost like a cold reenactment of the worst moment of their lives. It made me uncomfortable in a way that was hard to explain to anyone else. If I told someone I saw a dresser fall on a doll on TMZ, they might not understand why that was upsetting. But if you knew the timing and the context, it was different. It was not the clip by itself. It was the fact that it happened after a child I knew had died in that exact kind of accident. It was the fact that I was in my sister's room, close to where the family lived, watching something completely unrelated, and suddenly that image appeared. It almost felt like the event had followed me into the room. I am not saying it was paranormal. I do not know that. I did not see the child's ghost. I did not hear a voice. Nothing moved in the room. It was not a haunting in the traditional sense, but it was one of those odd moments that makes you stop and wonder if there is more going on than simple chance. Maybe grief and shock make patterns stand out more. Maybe when something terrible happens, your mind becomes sensitive to anything that resembles it. Maybe I would not have noticed that clip at all if the accident had not happened. That is possible. But even if that is true, it was still strange that the clip was there. The part that really stayed with me was the baby doll. There is something unsettling about using a doll to represent a child in an accident. I understand why people do it for demonstrations. You cannot use a real child. Obviously, a doll is the safest way to show what happened or what could happen. But when you have recently heard about a real child dying that way, seeing a toy baby used in a reenactment feels deeply wrong. It makes the real event feel both too real and too unreal at the same time. It was like my mind was trying to separate the two things. The child I knew was real. The doll on TV was not. The accident in the apartment complex was real. The recreation on TV was staged. But the image connected them so strongly that I could not keep them separate. The doll became a symbol of what had happened, and I did not want to see it. I also remember thinking about how random television can be. You can be sitting in a room watching something for entertainment, and suddenly something appears on the screen that hits a wound you did not expect to be touched. The show does not know you. The people who made the segment do not know what happened in your life. But somehow, their images find you at the exact wrong time, or the exact right time, depending on how you look at it. Maybe it was just coincidence, but it did not feel normal. I wondered if anyone else saw it the same way I did. If my sister was there, did she notice? Did she understand why it bothered me? Did anyone else connect it to the child? Or was it only me, sitting there and silently realizing that the TV was showing something almost identical to the tragedy that had happened nearby? Sometimes when something strange happens, the loneliness of noticing it makes it feel even stranger. You are the only person fully aware of why it matters. I never got an explanation for why that clip was on TMZ. That is the unresolved part. Maybe if I had searched online later, I could have found the episode or the segment and understood what it was about. Maybe there was a celebrity who had spoken about anchoring dressers, or a news item related to a lawsuit, or some safety campaign that TMZ happened to cover. But I did not find an answer, and over time, the memory became one of those odd little moments that sits in the back of your mind. It was not terrifying like someone standing in a dark hallway. It was not a monster or a shadow figure. It was just a television screen showing something that felt far too close to real life. But sometimes that kind of thing can be more disturbing because it happens in a normal setting. You are not in a haunted house. You are not walking through a cemetery at midnight. You are in a bedroom watching a gossip show, and then suddenly you are reminded of death in the most specific way possible. I think what bothered me most was the feeling that the child's death was being echoed. Not repeated exactly, but echoed through an image. A dresser falling, a small body represented by a doll, the same kind of accident. It felt like the tragedy had left a mark, and somehow that mark showed up on the TV when I least expected it. Maybe that is just how memory works. Maybe the world is full of random images, and our minds connect them to pain when pain is fresh. But I still cannot shake how strange it was. The child had seemed happy whenever I was around him. That is one of the details that makes the story hurt. He was not just the kid who died. He was a little boy who smiled, played, and had a presence in the apartment complex. He was someone's child, someone's family, Someone whose life ended in a way no one could have predicted from an ordinary dresser sitting in an ordinary home. Seeing that kind of accident recreated with a doll made the reality of it hit differently. It also made me think about how fragile life is, especially for children. Adults fill homes with furniture and objects without always realizing how dangerous they can become. A dresser is just a dresser until it tips. A room is just a room until 1 second changes everything. That was part of the horror of what happened to him. It was not some unknown outside threat. It was something inside the home. Something familiar. That made the TV image feel even more sickening, because it showed how quickly something normal can become deadly. I do not know if the clip was meant to warn people, shock people, or simply illustrate a story. I only know that seeing it right after knowing what happened to that child felt wrong. It was like a private grief had been turned into a public image, even though I know the show was not actually about him. That is the strange thing about coincidences. They do not have to be intentionally connected to feel connected. Sometimes the connection exists only for the person witnessing it, but that does not make it feel less real. I still think about it sometimes, not every day. But whenever I hear about furniture falling accidents or see warnings about anchoring dressers to walls, that memory comes back. I picture my sister's room. I picture the TV on. I picture the TMZ segment. I picture the dresser falling on the baby doll. Then I think about that little boy and how unbelievable it felt that something so similar would appear on the screen after his death. I wish I had a cleaner ending to the story. I wish I could say I found out later that the segment had a normal explanation and that it was just a badly timed coincidence. Maybe it was. That is probably the most reasonable answer. But I never learned why it was on that channel. And because of that, the memory stayed strange. It was not exactly scary, but it was deeply unsettling. My sister and brother-in-law were close to a family in their apartment complex, and one of that family's kids died when a dresser fell on him. I had known the child enough to remember him as happy and sweet, and we got along well whenever I was around. After he died, I was in my sister's room watching TMZ, of all things, when I suddenly saw a dresser falling on a baby doll in what looked like a recreation of the exact kind of accident that had taken his life. I still cannot explain why that was on TMZ. Maybe it was only a coincidence. But in that moment, it felt far too strange to ignore. About 10 years ago, my mom moved into a new house. It was in a small rural town in Ohio. The kind of place where almost everybody knows everybody, or at least knows someone who knows them. The population was under 2,000 people, so it was not some busy area with strangers constantly passing through. It was quiet, spread out, and the kind of town where unusual things stood out. That is part of why what happened has always bothered me so much. If this had happened in a big city, maybe I could explain it away more easily. But this was not a big city. This was a small town where people did not just disappear into crowds. The house itself was new to my mom, but not new in any other way. It had that feeling older places have when they have already been through a lot before you arrive. There were things that needed work, corners that looked neglected, and parts of the property that seemed like they had not been cared for properly in a long time. The main house was where all the moving activity was happening, but there was also a detached garage on the property. Attached to that garage was a small apartment unit, and that apartment was in rough shape. A friend and I were there on move-in day to help my mom with furniture and boxes. Moving days are usually chaotic. People are carrying things in and out, doors are left open, someone is asking where a box should go. Someone else is looking for tools or tape, and nobody really has time to pay attention to every corner of the property. But at some point, my friend and I got curious about the old apartment attached to the garage. It looked abandoned and beat up enough that it almost invited us to check it out. We were younger, curious, and probably not thinking too hard about whether it was a good idea, so we decided to take a look inside. The apartment was bad. The kitchen ceiling had partially collapsed, and not in a small cosmetic way. It looked like the place had been neglected for years. There was no sink, which already made it feel less like a livable apartment and more like a space someone had given up on. The whole unit needed a ton of work. It was not the kind of place where you would expect anyone to be staying comfortably. Everything about it suggested damage, abandonment, and disuse. If someone had told me nobody had stepped foot in there for a long time, I would have believed it. The air inside felt stale and dirty, like old buildings do when they have been closed up too long. There is a certain smell to places like that, a mix of dust, damp wood, old insulation, and whatever else has been sitting there undisturbed. The kind of smell that makes you not want to touch anything with your bare hands. The floor felt questionable. The kitchen looked useless. The walls and ceiling made it clear that this place was not ready for anyone to live in. It felt like the kind of apartment you would maybe tear down or completely rebuild, not rent out. We looked around, probably making comments about how bad it was, how much work it needed, and how weird it felt that it was attached to the garage. Then we walked around a corner and saw one of those pull-down ladders that lead up into an attic. That caught our attention right away. There is something about an attic ladder that makes people curious. Even if you know you should probably leave it alone, you want to see what is up there. Attics feel like secret spaces. They hold old boxes, forgotten furniture, insulation, dust, and sometimes things people meant to hide or forgot they left behind. Since the apartment was already so beat up, the attic made the whole thing feel even more like something out of a creepy story. We did not know what we expected to find, but we wanted to look. So we pulled the ladder down. It opened with that old rough sound those ladders make, the kind of creak and scrape that already makes you feel like you are doing something you should not be doing. We looked up into the dark opening. I do not remember if we had a flashlight or used phone lights, but we had enough light to climb up and see what was there. One of us went first, and the other followed. When we got into the attic, we found something that changed the whole feeling of the place. There was a camping tent up there. Not just a random old tent packed away in a bag, but a tent set up or placed in a way that made it seem like someone had been using it. And around it were a bunch of magazines, the kind you would describe as Playboy-type magazines. There were also a ton of empty glass jars, and among them was one spoon. That was when the apartment stopped feeling abandoned and started feeling occupied. The glass jars were what really made it feel wrong to me. A camping tent could have been old storage. Magazines could have been left behind by some previous owner or tenant. But a bunch of empty jars with a spoon made it feel like someone had been eating up there. It looked like the kind of setup someone might make if they were hiding out and using whatever they had. It did not look like random junk. It looked like evidence of a person staying in that attic. The idea of someone living above that ruined little apartment was deeply unsettling. The apartment below was barely usable. The kitchen ceiling was partially collapsed. There was no sink. It was not a normal living space. But the attic, hidden above it, had signs of someone spending real time there. A tent, magazines, empty jars, a spoon. It made the whole place feel suddenly active, like we had walked into someone's secret room. We called out. We yelled a bit to see if anyone was around. At first, it was probably casual, maybe something like, "Hello? Or anybody up here?" But even as we called, I think we both understood how strange the situation was. If someone was hiding up there, we were standing in their space. If they were nearby, we had just discovered where they had been sleeping or staying. And if they had heard us come in, they might have been watching or hiding somewhere. No one answered. The attic stayed quiet. That silence did not make me feel better. In a normal room, silence might mean nobody is there. In a hidden attic with a tent and signs of someone living there, silence can mean something else. It can mean someone is staying very still. It can mean someone does not want you to know they are there. It can mean you are not as alone as you think. I do not know if either of us said that out loud at the time, but the thought was there. The whole place felt wrong after that. We looked around enough to understand what we were seeing, but we did not stay longer than we needed to. There was no good reason to keep digging through someone's things, especially if someone might still be connected to them. I do not remember every detail of what we said to each other, but I remember the feeling that this was not normal. It was not just creepy old house stuff anymore. It felt like we had found evidence of a real person secretly living on the property my mom had just moved into. That idea is frightening in a way ghost stories are not. Ghosts are scary because they are mysterious, but people are scary because they can be unpredictable. If someone was secretly living up there, who were they? Did they know my mom was moving in? Had they been watching the house? Were they hiding while we were there? Did they come and go at night? Were they dangerous? Were they desperate? Were they mentally unstable? There were too many possibilities, and none of them were comforting. We left the attic and went back to the rest of the moving day. We did not tell my mom about it right away. I am not even sure why. Maybe because everyone was busy. Maybe because we were still trying to understand what we had found. Maybe because part of us did not want to make the move-in day more stressful. But we had definitely seen it. We both knew what was up there. The next day, we went back. I think part of us wanted to look again, maybe to confirm that we had not misunderstood. Maybe we wanted to show someone or figure out what to do. Maybe curiosity pulled us back. Whatever the reason, we returned to that old apartment and went back up toward the attic. Everything was gone. The tent was gone. The magazines were gone. The glass jars were gone. The spoon was gone. All of it. That was the moment the whole thing became much worse. If the stuff had still been there, it would have been creepy, but at least it would have been stable. We could have shown my mom. We could have called someone. We could have figured out whether it belonged to a previous owner or some forgotten tenant. But the fact that everything disappeared overnight meant someone came back after we found it. Someone knew the place had been discovered. Someone removed every trace of it. My mom had not gone up there. We had not told her about it, so she had no reason to clean it out. Nobody in the normal moving group knew what was there, at least not from us. It was not like a contractor came and cleared the attic overnight. This was not a busy place with random workers moving through. It was a rural Ohio town with fewer than 2,000 people. There were no homeless people around like you might expect in a city. There were no hikers, no campgrounds nearby, no steady stream of strangers passing through. That kind of setup did not make sense for the area. But someone had been there. Someone had come back and taken everything. The thought that still makes my stomach turn is this. Whoever it was might have been in there when we found it. That possibility feels more likely the more I think about it. We yelled to see if anyone was around, and no one answered. But if someone was hiding, of course they would not answer. They could have stayed completely still while we looked around. They could have been tucked somewhere in the attic, behind something, or in some dark corner we did not check. Or maybe they had heard us enter the apartment and slipped out before we climbed up. Maybe they were close enough to hear us talking about what we found. Maybe they watched us leave. Then later, after everyone was gone or asleep, they came back and cleared out their things. That means my mom may have moved into a house where someone had been secretly living in the attached garage apartment. Not days before, not months before. Right then, during move-in. Close enough that they removed their belongings the next day. That is the part that makes the story feel less like a weird discovery and more like a near miss. Because what if we had gone up there at the wrong time? What if we had surprised them while they were sleeping in the tent? What if they had been violent or desperate? What if they had nowhere else to go and felt cornered? Two curious people climbing into an attic where someone is secretly living could turn dangerous very quickly. At the time, we were just exploring. We did not fully understand the risk until later. I have tried to come up with normal explanations. Maybe the previous owner had stored that stuff there and came back to get it. But why would they leave a tent, magazines, empty jars, and a spoon in the attic of a ruined apartment and then suddenly remove it all the day after we found it? Maybe someone helping with the move knew about it and cleaned it out. But we had not told anyone, and it does not make sense that someone would quietly remove everything without mentioning it. Maybe it was just old junk and we missed it the second time. But no, it was gone. We had seen it clearly. The whole thing felt like evidence of a hidden person. I think about the spoon often. It is such a small detail, but it makes the situation feel real. A spoon is not like a tent or a magazine. A spoon means eating. It means someone was using those jars for something. It means a person was not just storing old items up there, but living in a practical, uncomfortable, secret way. They had a place to sleep, something to occupy themselves, containers, and a utensil. It was a survival setup, not storage. The tent also bothers me. Why set up a camping tent inside an attic unless you were trying to create a little private space? Maybe it gave them warmth. Maybe it kept bugs away. Maybe it made the attic feel more like a room. Whatever the reason, it suggests someone had planned to stay there more than once. This was not someone ducking in for 5 minutes. This was someone making that attic into a hidden shelter. And the fact that it was all gone by the next day means they were organized enough to vanish quickly. No note, no mess, no person, no explanation, just gone. The rural setting makes it even stranger to me. In bigger places, you hear stories about people secretly living in attics, crawl spaces, abandoned units, or behind walls. It is still terrifying, but at least there are more people around and more reasons someone might be drifting from place to place. In a tiny town, especially one without an obvious homeless population or transient foot traffic, the question becomes much sharper. Who was it? Someone local? Someone hiding from people? Someone who knew the property was empty before my mom moved in? Someone who had been using it for a long time? I do not know. I also wonder how long they had been there. Days? Weeks? Months? Did they live there before the sale? Did they watch people come to view the property? Did they hide whenever anyone came near? Did they know the new owner was moving in, or did move-in day catch them by surprise? Had they planned to leave anyway, or did our discovery force them out? The more questions I ask, the worse it gets. Because if someone had been living there secretly, then the property was not as empty as everyone thought. My mom moved in believing it was her house, her garage, her attached apartment, her space. But someone else had a hidden claim to part of it, at least in their own mind. That kind of realization can make a place feel unsafe, even if nothing else ever happens. You start thinking about every noise differently. You wonder if someone is still nearby. You wonder if they left completely or just moved somewhere else on the property. You wonder if they ever came back. I do not remember anything else happening afterward that gave us answers. There was no confrontation, no discovery of a person living there, no police finding someone, no neighbor explaining it. The person, whoever they were, simply disappeared. That lack of resolution is what makes it stick. Sometimes the scariest stories are not supernatural at all. Sometimes there is no ghost, no demon, no shadow figure, nothing from another world. Sometimes it is just the thought of another human being hiding close to you without your knowledge. Someone sleeping above a ruined apartment. Someone listening while you call out. Someone waiting until you leave, then gathering every trace of their existence and slipping away into a town so small they should not be able to vanish. That is what this felt like. We found a secret living space in an attic attached to my mom's new garage apartment. We saw the tent, the magazines, the jars, the spoon. We called out and got no answer. The next day, everything was gone. My mom did not know about it. We had not told her. There was no obvious person who should have been there. No homeless population, no campgrounds, no hikers, no city foot traffic. Just a rural Ohio property and an attic that had clearly been used. Somebody had lived there. Maybe they were hiding while we were there. And by the time we came back, they had vanished without a trace. I was driving my mom home one night around 2300. It was late enough that the streets were dark and quieter than usual, but because it was around Halloween, there were still people walking around outside. Some of them were in costumes, some were probably coming back from parties or going somewhere, and some were just moving through the neighborhood like people do on Halloween night. It was not completely empty, but it also was not crowded like daytime traffic. It had that strange late-night holiday feeling, where everything looks familiar but slightly different because people are out at odd hours and dressed in ways you do not normally see. I was driving carefully because of that. On Halloween, especially at night, you have to pay more attention than usual. People cross streets unexpectedly. Kids or teenagers can be moving in groups. Some people are distracted, laughing, talking, looking at their phones, or wearing costumes that make them harder to see. I remember there were people walking in the street while I was driving, and some crossed the road at the crossing, so I had to slow down and let them pass. It was dark, but most people were actually wearing reflectors or reflective things, which was nice because it made them easier to see. That made the night feel a little safer, at least in a normal way. The road itself was not strange to me. It was just a normal drive, the kind of route where you do not expect anything unusual. I was not scared. I was not thinking about ghosts or anything paranormal. I was only focused on getting my mom home safely, watching the road, and being careful because of the people walking around. The headlights lit up the street in front of me, and beyond that, everything was that deep nighttime darkness where you can only see what the car allows you to see. A little farther up ahead, I saw a person dressed in black walking across the road. At first, nothing about it seemed impossible. He looked like a person. There was no doubt in my mind that I was seeing a person. He was not a shadow, not a trick of the headlights, not something I had to stare at and question. He had the shape and movement of a person walking from one side of the road to the other. Because he was wearing black, he stood out differently than the people with reflective clothing, but I still saw him clearly enough to react. I slowed down right away. I did not want him to feel rushed or stressed, and I did not want to take any chances. When you see someone crossing the road at night, especially dressed in dark clothing, You slow down. It does not matter if they are in the crosswalk or not. It does not matter if you think they should move faster. You slow down because the road is not a place to gamble with a human life. So I let him pass. He crossed in front of me, about 10 meters ahead. He was close enough that I could tell where he was going, but not so close that I had to stop suddenly. I remember watching him move across the road, and everything about it seemed normal for those few seconds. A person in black, crossing the street late at night on Halloween. That was all. If the story ended there, I would never have thought about it again. But then I reached the exact spot where he had crossed. When I got to the point where he had walked, I looked to the right, because that was the direction he had been heading. I did not glance quickly. I actually took my time to look, because something about the timing made me expect to still see him there. He had only crossed seconds earlier. He should have been walking away from the road, maybe on the sidewalk, maybe along the edge of the vegetation, maybe continuing down some path or driveway. There should have been some sign of him. But there was nothing. What was on the right side of the road was only a thick bush, about 2 meters high. It was not a thin hedge someone could easily slip through. It was dense vegetation, the kind you cannot just walk through casually, especially not at night, and not within a few seconds. It stretched for about 10 meters in each direction, so there was nowhere obvious for him to disappear. It was also only about 2 meters aside from the road, which made the situation even stranger. He had crossed, reached that side, and should have been visible. But he was gone. I looked hard because my brain immediately tried to fix what I was seeing. At first, I thought maybe he had turned along the side of the road, but if he had, I should have seen him. There was no long delay between when he crossed and when I reached the spot. It was only a few seconds. He could not have walked 10 meters in either direction and disappeared from view that quickly, especially not without me noticing. I was looking exactly where he should have been. Then, I thought maybe there was an opening in the bush, maybe a small path or gap I had never noticed before. But there was no visible path, no driveway, no doorway, no break in the vegetation that a person could slip into. It was just thick, dark bush. It did not look passable. And even if someone had forced their way through it, I would have expected movement, sound, leaves shaking, branches moving. There was nothing like that. That was when the moment turned from ordinary to deeply unsettling. Only a few seconds earlier, I had slowed down for a person. I knew I had seen him. I knew he was there. I had not imagined him from far away. He had crossed the road in front of my car, and I had reacted like any driver would. But when I reached the place where he should have been, there was no one. He had nowhere to go. He could not have vanished to the left or right without being seen. He could not have walked through the bush naturally. He could not have moved fast enough to get out of sight. And yet he was gone. I think what makes it worse is that it happened on Halloween night. I know that sounds too perfect, almost like something from a made-up story, but that is exactly when it happened. Because there were other people outside, it made the first sighting feel normal. A person in black crossing the road on Halloween is not unusual. There are people in costumes, people walking around, people moving through the dark. So my mind had no reason to be suspicious at first. The night gave the figure a normal explanation, right up until he disappeared. If it had been any other night, maybe I would have questioned him sooner. Maybe I would have thought, why is someone dressed in black crossing here? But because it was Halloween, he blended into the idea of the evening. He became just another person outside. That made the disappearance feel even stranger, because the first half of the event was so normal and the second half made no sense. I kept driving because I was in the car and had my mom with me, but my mind stayed on that spot. I kept replaying it. The person in black walking across the road, me slowing down, him reaching the right side, the bush, the empty space, no movement, no path, no person. I do not know if my mom saw him the same way I did, but I know what I saw from the driver's seat. And as the driver, I had to be focused. This was not something I noticed casually while looking out a side window. I was watching the road. I was paying attention because people were out walking. I saw a person and slowed the car because of him. That is not the kind of thing you easily mistake for nothing. The rational part of me still tries to explain it. Maybe he was faster than I thought. Maybe there was a small gap in the vegetation that I missed. Maybe the darkness hid him once he stepped off the road. Maybe his black clothing made him blend into the bush so perfectly that I looked right at him and did not see him. That might be the most reasonable explanation. If someone is wearing all black at night and stands beside dark vegetation, they can disappear visually, especially from inside a car. But that still does not feel completely right. He had been moving. If he had simply stood near the bush, I should have seen some shape, some movement, some difference in the darkness. If he had crouched, that would be even stranger, because why would he do that? If he had gone into the bush, the vegetation should have moved. If he had turned left or right, I should have caught him in the headlights, or at least in the side view as I passed. But there was nothing. Not a person blending in, not a shadow moving. Nothing. The bush itself is the detail I cannot get past. It was thick and about 2 meters high, close to the road, stretching in both directions. It was not like there was a sidewalk leading behind a house or a gap between fences. It was just a wall of vegetation. If a person crossed the road and walked toward it, they would have had to stop, turn, or force their way through. There was no time for any of that before I looked. The moment between seeing him cross and checking the area was too short. It felt like he walked out of the road and out of reality. I know that sounds dramatic, but that is what it felt like. 1 second, he was a real person, real enough for me to slow the car. The next second, he was gone, and the place he should have occupied was empty. That is the kind of thing that leaves your brain searching for missing frames. Like a video with part of the footage cut out. You know there should be an in-between moment where the person goes somewhere, but that moment does not exist. It was not a scary experience in the sense that I felt threatened. He did not turn toward the car. He did not chase us. He did not appear suddenly at the window or do anything aggressive. He simply crossed the road. But the disappearance was unsettling, because it broke the rules of what I expected to see. People do not vanish in 2 seconds on an open roadside with nowhere to go. And when your brain expects to see someone and instead finds nothing, the emptiness itself becomes frightening. I think that is what stuck with me most. The emptiness. If I had seen him standing by the bush, the story would be nothing. If I had seen him walking away, nothing. If I had seen him step through a clear gap in the vegetation, nothing. But seeing nothing made the whole moment feel wrong. The absence was louder than anything he could have done. I have tried to remember if there were any other details that might explain it. Was there a driveway hidden there? I do not remember one. Was there a gate? No. Was the bush thinner than it looked? It did not seem like it. Was the road curved in a way that could hide him? Not enough. Was I tired? Maybe. But I was alert, because I was driving. Was the darkness playing tricks on me? Maybe. But I saw him clearly when he crossed. Could it have been a shadow from another person or object? No. Because it moved like a person and crossed the road in front of me. It was no doubt a person. That is the line I always come back to. There was no doubt when I saw him. I did not see a vague black shape and decide it was a person after the fact. I saw a person in black crossing the road, and I slowed down to let him pass. My reaction proves how real he looked to me. Drivers do not slow for shadows unless those shadows look enough like people to trigger the instinct to protect them. This did. And then he was gone. Maybe the whole thing has a simple explanation I missed in the dark. Maybe there was a narrow opening in the vegetation, or maybe he turned sideways and blended into the bush in his black clothes. Maybe he was someone in a Halloween costume who knew the area well and slipped away quickly. Maybe the headlights in darkness created a perfect blind spot. I can accept that as possible. But possible is not the same as satisfying. The memory still feels strange because of how fast it happened. The figure crossed only 10 meters ahead. I was close enough to check almost immediately. The bush was too close to the road and too thick to simply walk through. There was nowhere for him to disappear, and yet there was no one there when I looked. It made the rest of the drive feel different. After something like that, the darkness outside the car changes. Every shadow near the road becomes more noticeable. Every person walking in the distance looks a little less normal. The whole Halloween atmosphere, which had been kind of harmless before, starts feeling heavier. Costumes, dark clothing, people crossing streets, the glow of reflectors, the spaces between streetlights, all of it feels slightly off. I did not see him again. There was no second appearance, no dramatic ending, no explanation waiting around the corner, just that one impossible-looking moment. A person in black crossed the road, heading toward a place where a person could not go, and by the time I reached that spot, seconds later, he had vanished. That is all that happened. But sometimes that is all is enough, because I still remember the feeling of slowing the car for him. I still remember looking right, expecting to see him walking away. I still remember the thick bush standing there instead, dark and solid, with no path through it. I still remember realizing that he could not have disappeared in any direction, and yet he had. Maybe it was just a Halloween trick of darkness, black clothing, and bad timing. Maybe he found a gap I could not see. Maybe I somehow missed him. Or maybe, for a few seconds that night, I slowed down for someone who was not really there in the normal way. I do not know. I only know that I saw a person cross the road, and when I reached the place he went, there was nowhere for him to be. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.